CMA tools is a set of Blender node groups and add-on tools to make blending easier. Get on my Patreon for just $5. 1.3 adds geometry node preset saving and loading, a simple plane remesher, camera optimization nodes, and grass striper. To install CMA tools, open your Blender instance. I'd recommend using a program called Blender Launcher to manage your instances. Drag the CMA tools zip file over your Blender window and click OK. After you do that, inside the viewport on the right side panel, also known as the N panel, you will now have a CMA tools tab. To demonstrate geometry node preset saving, I'm going to use Tube Shaper. On the side panel, click Add to Scene. At the top of the CMA tools tab, click on GN presets. There's a search box to search for presets, and then a drop down to select presets. You can see a few of the tests that I've done already. Select the geometry node modifier that you would like to save. Let's edit this to make it more obvious. Let's switch this over to Railing 2 and perhaps a second profile with a twist. After you make your modifications that you would like to save, click on Save, add a name. Now underneath the preset dropdown, you'll be able to find the preset that you just saved. Let's select Star Spin and press Load. Let's select a different preset to show it loading, and then we can select the one we just made and press Load. Sometimes the viewport doesn't update immediately, so you have to click on it and rotate slightly to get it to update. But you can see it just with that, the presets have been saved and loaded. This is generic. It works with any geometry node group as long as the name is the same. It will also ignore the 0.001 that Blender will add on the duplicates. So as long as the actual body name is the same, it will load the presets that you have. You can also open the built-in presets. There's quite a few built-in presets for Grass Striper, so you can edit those here, or you could edit your own presets that you have saved inside of user presets. Let's start with plane remesher. Let's make a little environment. So now that we have some landscape that you've sculpted, and perhaps you got a little carried away with the resolution. Now you might think of several ways to fix this. You might go over to sculpt mode and try to remesh it in here. Then you get all this artifacting from it just being a flat plane and not having any volume. And you might do the same thing in object mode, add a remesh modifier to it, and you can see how it fails. Thirdly, you might go over to the object data property panel and do a quad remesh. In my experience, this always gives a terrible result and takes way too long to process. 50% of the time it will just fail. It needs some work. But luckily, now you have plane remesher. So select the object that you would like to be remeshed, go over to the side panel and scroll down to plane remesher, click add to object, and you can see it's now remeshed. Now keep in mind this is a 2D remesh. So if your object does have volume, it won't keep the volume. And it's also only a vertical remesh. So any overhangs will just be clipped off. Over in the modifier panel, you can see the settings for the remesh. You can choose from grid size or manual. So you can set how many, so you can set the resolution manually, or just set the size at which you want each square to be. Of course, be careful with just sliding this. You can get some pretty dense meshes pretty quickly if you go all the way to the left. Edge margin will delete vertices that don't intersect with the object. Also for holes, it will delete vertices that don't intersect with it. You can choose geometry, which is the object that you have the modifier on, object or collection. For instance, what I will typically do is I'll have a high poly mesh that actually has all my textures and sculpt normal maps and everything. But then to keep point systems, so grass, trees, ferns, to populate those onto a surface, using the high poly mesh can take a long time and slow down your scene a lot. So what I can do is you can go add another object, add the same plane remesh to it, go over to object mode, select this, and then have this be a lower resolution. And you would scatter your grass on the lower resolution one instead of the higher resolution one to keep performance up. I would actually probably keep that off, then just use this, just scatter objects. Now for camera culling. Select the object that you want to be culled and click add to surface. Underneath the modifier panel, you will now find a camera culling node added to the object. You can switch between active camera or manual camera. This is so you can select a specific camera instead of whichever one you are viewing from. Let's go back to active camera. You can change the domain type, being culled, so faces, instances, or points. Let's turn on custom culling. If we go into the camera view, you can now see only what's inside of the view of the camera is being culled. You can increase the padding. The first padding is just an offset, and then the second one, the Y and X angle, changes the angle that's being culled. Might make more sense from the top. If we reduce the focal length, you can see padding is just an offset, angle increases or decreases the FOV. There's also distance culling with a dither slider. The dither slider usually works best with instances, so you can have a smooth transition from grass to an underlying texture. Now for grass shaper. Let's add a ground plane, add a material to it. Let's make it brown. We'll go into rendered view, go to the side panel, and go down to grass striper. The one you'll want to add to your grass plane is the grass striper. All these other things you can add are for grass striper to function properly. Click add to object. In the modifier panel, you can now see grass striper was added. Let's make the grass a little bit longer so it's more clear what's going on. Maybe the grass plane a little bit bigger. Let's also increase the density. Now you can really see what's happening. The grass is bending in the direction as if it got mowed. Let's start off at the top with edge collections. Let's click use edge collection, and you'll see the direction now breaks. We need to make an edge collection. Let's add a Suzanne buried in the ground over here, and perhaps a cube. Select the objects that you would like to be in your edge collection. Make sure not to select the ground plane and drag them over into the edge collection. And now you can see around edge collection objects, they're now mowing stripes as if they were mowed around. Let's make the ground plane a little bit bigger. And perhaps make the grass a little longer. There we go. The next setting down is grass density, rather self-explanatory. Render multiplier will render the grass density by this number at render time. So instead of, let's say, you had this at 100, but you still want 1,000 at render time, make this 10. Let's set those back. Rotate stripes. We'll rotate the stripes. Let's put these at a 40.5 degree angle, and you can now see they've been rotated. Outline stripe size will determine how far out the outline, the edge collection will affect the grass. So if we switch this down to 1 meter, you can now see there's only one stripe. Well, if we go 5 meters, it's affecting quite a large area. Stripe size will affect how large each stripe is. Let's make this 2. And you can see a much bigger mower must have been used to mow this grass. Let's take that back down to 1. Grass lean strength will determine how much the grass leans. If you go 0.1, it's barely visible. If you go 0.5, it's quite strong. Grass striper comes with several built-in grass assets. There's simple grass. If we zoom in, you can see they're just planes with the translucency green shader applied. Let's zoom back out and select realistic grass. For each grass preset, there's a panel at the bottom of all of the panels with the settings. Here you can change the width or the length of the grass, along with overriding the material. Let's switch over to realistic grass, and let's make the grass a bit bigger. Let's go 3 times its current size. Now you can see it's quite more realistic than the previous grass. There's a trimmed mode for this grass, which will chop off the top, and it will also increase performance slightly. And just like with the simple grass, you can select the width and length along with overriding the material if you need to. Custom grass will be covered at a later point in the video, but you can add in your own grass assets. Realize instances in viewport drastically increases performance when viewing the grass. If we turn off render view and see in solid view how buttery smooth this is, and then we turn off realize instances, it will drastically degrade performance. So keep realize instances in viewport on if you want good performance. Realize instances always will realize instances for the render, which will also decrease performance and drastically increase the amount of RAM needed to render. So I'd recommend keeping that one unchecked. Now to the first panel. There's 2 optimization stages. There's the base mesh and then the grass instances, if we subdivide the base mesh a few times and turn on base mesh culling, you can now see it's only putting grass instances where it's visible from the camera's perspective, but in a blocky fashion. If we turn on point culling, it will cull the individual points. Doing base culling first drastically improves performance, since it's not even calculating any of these points. Well, if you have point culling on only, it will have to calculate all the points and then cull them. So the render performance might increase, but the time it takes to calculate all the points is still pretty high. Then the points still won't show up. So let's decrease the padding, and you can see the point culler isn't culling the points. They weren't placed in the first place, so it's a very small area. There's a distance culling. Increasing the dither makes a transitionary phase, which will hide the transition. Let's turn both of these off for right now and go back to rendered view. Randomization settings are next. There's spin randomization. So this is the angle of the grass blades from the Z direction. If we turn that off, you can see they're all going in the same direction now. And then there's lean random. So this is how random the lean strength is. If we turn that off, you can also see they're all pointing in the exact same direction now. Turning these both up to 0.5 gives a pretty good result. Stripe 2 settings. To enable Stripe 2 settings, under blend strength, make this 0.5, and then for the stripe rotation, this will probably be changed for the final release, but change the angle to 90 degrees. And you can now see there's checkerboarding going on. Make the stripe a little bit bigger. You can make it a cool effect is instead of having 90 degrees, have 45 degrees. So they're parallelograms instead of checkerboarding, which a lot of fancy places will do. The second blend mode, random, instead of blending between the two directions, will randomly design the two directions, which in some scenes will look better, but typically just obscures the actual lean. You might want to increase the lean strength for random. I typically stick with blend. Let's turn off the second stripe mode for right now and talk about tire settings. So tires will typically make the grass lean even more than the deck. In fact, the deck will often suck up grass. Let's turn up the tire strength 50% and maybe the width, since the track is 2 meters, maybe 0.25 meters would look good. And you can now see in between each row, the grass is getting leaned even further than in the center of the row. You can adjust the smoothness of this transition over here. So if you want it to be really smooth instead of a hard wheel, I guess, you can do that. Inside of the N panel, underneath the GN preset tab, Grass Striper comes with a lot of presets, which you can choose from. They're all based on real mowers. So let's go 20-inch push mower, click load. It will instantly switch over all of the settings for the preset. The density is lower than what you probably want, just to preserve performance for large scenes. Let's load the 32. And then there's checkerboarding and parallelogram modes for each mower size. So let's say it's a really big yard and you're using a 72-inch 45-degree cut. You can see how it instantly pulls that up. Finally, let's cover how to use your own custom assets for Grass Striper. In the side panel, select Custom Grass, and then you can either make or download your own grass assets. This works with Botanica and Geoscatter assets, and should work with most other grass assets. Let's do Geoscatter first. Plant. Let's use Drylands Grass Medium. Here we go. So you'll want to do a few things to prepare this for scattering. Firstly, there's way too many mesh islands. Grass Shaper will divide your mesh up into each individual blade of grass before scattering, because it can't just scatter this and tilt it. It wouldn't work. There's probably some way I could use it make it so it would shear. First, you'll want to take your grass asset, and let's select the majority of it, like that. Click Control L, maybe a little bit less. Then click Control L until there's just a small section of grass blades not selected. Delete everything you have selected. Then under Grass Shaper, select the object that you would like to be scattered. Let's reduce the grass density just in case for this test. All right, a couple things you can see. A lot of the grass is connected. So if you want them to not clump up like this, you want to go over to your grass asset and separate them. You can see for geoscatter, there's thin lines connecting a lot of them. In fact, let's select just the thin line and press Shift G to select similar and click amount of faces around an edge and then delete edges. That should improve it significantly. Looks like a few things are still connected. Let's actually unselect the object and reselect it. See if that helps. Let's do that again, but with these points where they come together. Select one of those points and select amount of connecting edges. You can see many have been selected correctly. There's been some errors though. Let's go into side view and unselect those. There we go. Then press V. That doesn't work. Beautiful. And then let's just delete these connecting bits. Let's up the density to see how it looks. Finally, what you'll probably want to do is scale up your grass model or add in a filling layer of grass. Let's just scale it up for now. So that's definitely too big, but you get the point. Let's render this, see how it looks. You'll want to select the material of your grass asset. So this is .gs dry grass 001. Here we go. Someone definitely has a dying yard, but you can see that it worked. Now for Botanica assets, they're a little bit more involved. Something to keep in mind for Botanica assets is they use attributes to control the hue and season of the asset, reducing the amount of grass blades. In fact, Botanica assets aren't connected like scatter assets, so it often turns out much better, other than the material being all broken. What material does this use? Now you might be able to go into the Botanica attribute, and instead of having an attribute, just have a color. Let's go RGB. Let's just plug that into dry or fresh, see if that works, but it doesn't. And then the same thing over here. These are all values. There we go. All right, so these are the values that seem to work inside of the Botanica grass material. I repress the fresh/dry attribute with a color set to black, and then inside of the Botanica attribute node, I replaced it with these values. You can get CMA tools for just $5 on my Patreon, or from the other usual places you would get Blender add-ons. Thank you for watching. If you have any suggestions, feel free to let me know. You can also email me if you have any issues with the add-on. Thank you for watching.